Popular imagination, I judge, responded actively to our wireless bulletins of Lake's start northwestward into the regions never trodden by human foot or penetrated by human imagination. Though we did not mention his wild hopes of revolutionising the entire sciences of biology and geology, his preliminary sledging and boring journey through January 1118 with Peabody and 5 others, marred by the loss of 2 dogs in an upset when crossing one of the great pressure ridges on the ice, had brought up more and more of the arcane slate, and even I was interested in singularly profusion of evident fossil makings in the unbelievably ancient stratum. These markings, however, were of very primitive life forms, involving no great paradox except that any life form should occur in a rock, as definitely as Precambrian as it seemed to be. Hence, I still fail to see the good sense in Lake's demand for an interlude in our time-saving programme. An interlude requiring the use of all 4 planes, many men, the whole of the expedition's mechanical apparatus. I did not, in the end, veto the plan. Though I decided not to accompany the northwestward party despite Lake's plea for my geological advice. While they were gone, I would remain at the base with Peabody and 5 men and work out final plans for the eastward shift. In preparation for this transfer, one of the planes had begun to move up as good gasoline supply from McMurdo Sound, but this could wait temporarily. I kept with me 1 sledge and 9 dogs, since it was unsafe to be at any time without possible transportation in the utterly tenantless world of aeon-long death. Lake's sub-expedition into the unknown, as everyone will recall, sent out its reports from the short-wave transmitters on the plains, these being simultaneously picked up by our apparatus at the southern base and by the Arkham at McMurdo Sound, whence they were relayed to the outside world on wavelengths of up to 50 metres. The start was made on January 22nd at 4 a.m, and the first wireless message was received came only 2 hours later, when Lake spoke of descending and starting a small-scale ice melting and bore at point of some 300 miles away from us. 6 hours after that second and very exciting message told of the frantic, beaver-like work whereby this shallow shaft had been sunk and blasted, culminating into the discovery of the slate fragments with several markings approximately like the ones which had caused the original puzzlement. 3 hours later, a brief bulletin announced that the resumption of the flight in the teeth of the raw and piercing gale, and when I dispatched a message protest against any further hazards, Lake replied curtly that his new specimens made any hazard worth taking. I saw that his excitement had reached the point of mutiny, and that I could do nothing to check his headlong risk of the whole of the expedition's success. It was appalling to think of his plunging deeper and deeper into that torrentious and sinister white immensity of tempests and unfathomed mysteries which stretched off for some 1,500 miles in the half-known, half-suspected coastline of Queen Mary and Knox Lands. Then, in an hour and a half more, came the doubly excited message from Lake's moving plane, which almost reversed my sentiments and made me wish that I had accompanied the party.
10:05 p.m. On the wing after snowstorm. Have spied mountain range ahead higher than any hitherto seen. May equal Himalayas, allowing for height of plateau. Probable latitude is 76 degrees 15. Longitude 113 degrees 10. E reaches as far as the right and left. Suspicion of 2 smoking cones, all peaks black and bare of snow. Gale blowing off them impedes navigation.
After that, Peabody, the men, and I hung breathlessly over the receiver. Thought of that titanic mountain rampant 700 miles away inflamed our deepest sense of adventure. We rejoiced that our expedition, if not ourselves personally, had been its discoverers. In half an hour, Lake called us again.
Moulton's plane forced down on plateau and foothills, but nobody hurt and perhaps can repair. Shall transfer essentials to the other 3 for return or further moves if necessary. But no more heavy plane travel needed just now. Mountains surpass anything in imagination. I'm going up scouting in Carl's plane, with all weight out. You can't imagine anything like this. Highest peaks must go over 35,000 feet. Everest out of the running. Artwood to work out height of the Theodolite, while Carol and I go up. Probably wrong about cones. All formations look stratified. Possible Precambrian slate with other strata mixed in. Queer skyline effects. Regular sections of cubes clinging to the highest peaks. Whole thing marvellously in red and gold light of the low sun. Like land of mystery in a dream or a gateway to forbidden world, untrodden wonder. Wish you were here to study.
Though it was technically sleeping time, none of us listeners thought for a moment of retiring. It must have been a good deal the same at McMurdo Sound, where the supply cache and the Arkham were also getting the messages. For Captain Douglas gave out a call congratulating everyone on the important find, and Sherman, the cache operator, seconded his statements. We were sorry, of course, about the damaged aeroplane, but hoped it could be easily mended. Then, at 11 p.m, came another call from Lake.
Up with Carol over highest foothills. Don't dare try to rally tall peaks at present weather, but shall later. Frightful work climbing and hard going at this altitude, but worth it. Great range fairly solid, hence can't get any glimpses beyond. And summit exceeds Himalayas, very queer. Range looks like Precambrian slate, with plain signs of many other upheaval strata. Was wrong about volcanism. Goes further in either direction than we can see. Swept clear of the snow above 21,000 feet. Odd formations on slopes of highest mountains. Great low square blocks of exactly vertical sides and rectangular lines of low vertical ramparts. Like the old Asian castles clinging to steep mountains in Rourke's paintings. Impressive from distance. Flew close to some and Carol thought that they formed smaller separate pieces, but this is probably withering. Most edges crumbled and rounded off as exposed to storms and climate changes for millions of years. Parts, especially upper parts, seem to be the lighter coloured rock than visible strata on slopes proper, hence the evidently crystalline origins. Close flying shows many cave mouths, some unnaturally regular in outline, square and semicircular. You must come and investigate. Think I saw a rampant squarely on top of one peak. Height seems to about 30,000 to 35,000 feet. I'm up 21.5 myself, endeavourishly gnawing cold. Wind whistles and pipes through passes and in and out of caves, but no flying danger so far.
From then on, for another half hour, Lake kept up a running fire of comment and expressed his intention of climbing some of the peaks on foot. I replied that I would join him as soon as I could send a plane, and that Peabody and I would work out the best gasoline plan. Just where and how to concentrate our supply in the view of the expedition's altered character. Obviously, Lake's boring operations, as well as the airplane activities, would need a great deal delivered for the new base, which was to establish at the foot of the mountains. It was possible that the eastward flight might not be made after all this season. In connection with this business, I called Captain Douglas and asked him to get as much as possible out of the ships and up the barrier with the single dog team we had left there. A direct route across the unknown region between Lake and McMurdo Sound was that we were really ought to establish. Lake called me later to say that he had decided to let the camp stay where the Moulton's plane had been forced down and where the repairs were already progressed somewhat. The ice sheet was very thin, with dark ground there and visible, and would sink in some borings and blasts at the very point before making any sledge trips or climbing expeditions. He spoke of the ineffable mystery of the whole scene, and the queer state of his sensations at being in the lee of the vast silent pinnacles whose ranks shot up like a wall reaching to the sky at the world's rim. Artward's theodolite observations had placed the height of the 5 tallest peaks at from 30,000 to 34,000 feet, and the windswept nature of the terrain clearly disturbed Lake, for it argued the occasional existence of prodigious gales violent beyond anything we had ever encountered. His camp lay a little more than 5 miles from the higher foothills abruptly rose. I could almost trace a note of the subconscious alarm in his words, flashed across the glacial void of 700 miles, as he urged that we all hasten with the matter to get the strange new region deposited off as soon as possible. He was about to rest now after a continuous day's work of the almost unparalleled speed, strenuous and results. In the morning I had a 3-cornered wireless talk with Lake and Captain Douglas at their wildly separated bases. It was agreed that one of Lake's planes would come to my base for Peabody, the 5 men and myself, as well as all the fuel it could carry. The rest of the fuel's question, depending on the decision about an easterly trip, could wait a few days, since Lake had enough for immediate camp heat and borings. Eventually the old southern base ought to be restocked, but if we postponed the easterly trip, we could not use it till the next morning. And meanwhile, Lake must send a plane to explore the direct route between the new mountains and McMurdo Sound. Peabody and I prepared to close our base for a short or long period, as the case might be. If we wintered in the Antarctic, we could probably fly straight from Lake's base to the Arkham without returning to this spot. Some of our conical tents were already been reinforced by blocks of hard snow, and we now decided to complete the job of making a permanent Eskimo village. Owing to a very liberal tent supply, Lake had with him all that the base would ever need after our arrival. I wirelessed that Peabody and I would be ready for the northwest move after 1 day's work and 1 night's rest. Our labours, however, were not very steady after 4 p.m, for about that time Lake began to send in the most extraordinary and excited messages. His working day had started unpompously since the airplane survey of the next exposed rock surfaces showed an entire base of those archaean and primordial strata for which he was looking, and which formed a great part of the colossal peaks that loomed up in the tantalizing distance from the camp. Most of the rocks glimpsed were apparently Jurassic and Comanchean sandstones, with Permian and Triassic schistts, and now with a glossy black outcropping suggested a hard and slotty coal. This rather discouraged Lake, whose plans all hinged on unearthing specimens more than 500 million years older. It was clear to him that in order to recover the archaean slate vein in which we had found the odd markings, he would have to make a long sledge trip from the foothills to the steep slopes of the gigantic mountains themselves. He had resolved, nevertheless, to do some local borings as part of the expedition's general programme, hence set up the drill and put 5 men to work with it, while the rest finished setting up camp and repairing the damaged aeroplane. The softest visible rock, a sandstone about a quarter of a mile from the camp, had been chosen for the first sampling, and the drill made excellent progress without such supplementary blasting. It was about 3 hours afterwards, following the first really heavy blast of the operation, that the shouting of the drill and the crew was heard, and young Gedney, the acting foreman, rushed into the camp with startling news. They had struck a cave. Early in the boring, the sandstone had given place to the vein of Comanchean limestone, full of minute fossil cephalopods, corals, echines, and spirifera, with occasional suggestions of saliferous sponges and marine vertebrate bones, the latter probably of tylosost, sharks, and ganoids. This in itself was important enough that the affording of the first vertebrate fossils in the expedition had yet secured, and was shortly afterwards that the drill head dropped through this stratum and into the apparent vacancy. A wholly new and doubly intense wave of excitement spread among the excavators. A good-sized blast had laid open the subterranean secret, and now, through a jagged aperture perhaps 5 feet across and 3 feet thick, there yawned before the avid searchers a section of shallow limestone, hollowing worn more than 50 million years ago by the trickling groundwaters of a bygone tropical world. The hollowed layer was no more than 7 or 8 feet deep, but extended off indefinitely in all directions, and had a fresh, slightly moving air of what suggested its membership in its extensive subterranean system. Its roof and floor were abundantly equipped with large stalactites and stalagmites, some of which meant in columnar form. But important above all else was the vast deposit of shells and bones in places nearly choked the passage. Washed down from unknown jungles of mesonic tree ferns and fungi and the forest treachery cycads, fan palms and primitive angiosperms. This osseous malady contained representatives from more Cretaceous, Eocene and other animal species than the greatest paleontologist could ever count it as classified in a year. Mollusks, crustacean armour, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds and early mammals, great and small, known and unknown. No wonder Gedney ran back to the camp shouting. No wonder everyone else dropped work and rushed headlong through the biting cold to where the tall derrick marked the new-found gateway of secrets of inner earth and vanished aeons. When Lake had satisfied the first keen edge of his curiosity, he scribbled a message in his notebook that young Moulton had run back to the camp to dispatch it by wireless. This was my first word of the discovery, and it told of the identification of early shells, bones, ganoids and placidoderms, remnants of the labyrinthidonts and canodonts, great muscular skull fragments, dinosaur vertebrae and armour plates, pterodactyl teeth and wing bones, Archaeopteryx debris, Miocene shark's teeth, primitive bird skulls and skulls, vertebrae, and other bones of archaic mammals such as the Polyothrys, Xenodons, Dinocrasius, Nephini, Oreodons, and Titanotheris. There was nothing recent as a mastodon, elephant, true camel, deer, or bovine animal. Hence, Lakes concluded that the last deposits had occurred during the Oligocene age, and that the hollowed sternum had lay at its present dried, dead, and inaccessible state for the last 30 million years. On the other hand, the prevalence of such early life forms was singular to the highest degree, though the limestone formation was, on the evidence of such typical inbred fossils and ventriculites, possibly and unmistakably Comanchean, and not a particle earlier. The free fragments in the hollow space included a surprising proportion from the organism hitherto considered as peculiar and odd older periods, even rudimentary fishes, mollusks and corals as remote as the Silurian or Ordovician. The inevitable inference was that this part of the world there had been a remarkable and unique degree of continuity between the life of over 300 million years ago and that of only 30 million years ago. How far this continuity had extended beyond the Oligocene age when the cavern was closed was of course past all speculation. In any event, the coming of this frightful ice in the Pleistocene age of 500,000 years ago, a mere yesterday as compared to the age of this cavity, must have put an end to any of the primal forms which had locally managed to outlive their common terms. Lake was not too content to let his first message stand, but had another bulletin written and dispatched across the snow in camp before Moulton could get back. After that, Moulton stayed at the wireless in one of the planes, transmitting back to me and to the Arkham for relaying to the outside world the frequent postscripts of which Lake had sent him by succession of messengers. Those who followed the newspapers will remember the excitement created among the men of science by the afternoon's reports. Reports which had finally led, after all these years, to the organisation of that Starkweather Moor expedition of which I am so anxiously to dissuade from my purposes. I had better give the messages, literally, as Lake sent them, and our base operator McTighe translated them from the pencil shorthand.
Fowler makes discovery of highest importance in sandstone and limestone fragments from blast. Several distinct triangular striated prints of those in Archean slate, proving that source survived from over 600 million years ago to Comanchean times without more than moderate morphological changes and decrease in average size. Comanchean prints apparently more primitive or descendant, if anything, the older ones. Emphasis of importance of discovery and press will mean to biology what Einstein has meant to mathematics and physics. Joins up with any of my previous work and amplifies conclusions. appear to indicate, as I suspected, that Earth has seen whole cycle or cycles of organic life before known one that begins with the archosaic cells was evolved and specialized not later than 1,000 million years ago, when the planet was young and restlessly uninhabitable for many life forms or normal protoplasmic structure. Question arises when, where, and how development took place. Later, examining certain skeletal fragments of large land and marine saurians, primitive mammals, find singular local wound or injuries to body structure not attributed to any known predatory or carnivorous animal of any period. Of two sorts, straight, penetrant bores and apparently hacking incisions. One or two cases, cleanly severed bone. Not many specimens affected. I'm sending to camp for electrical torches. We'll extend the search area underground by hacking away stalactites. Still later, I found peculiar soapstone fragment about 6 inches across and 1.5 inches thick, wholly unlike any visible local formation. Greenish, but no evidences to place its period. Has curious smoothness and regularity, shaped like 5-pointed star with tips broken off and signs of other cleavage and inward angles at the centre of the surface. Small tooth depressions in centre of unbroken surface. Arouses much curiosity to the source of weathering. Probably some freak of water action. Carroll, with magnifier, thinks he can make out additional markings of geological significance. Groups of tiny dots in regular patterns, dogs growling uneasy as we work, and seem to hate this soapstone. We'll see if it has any peculiar odour. We'll report again when Mills gets back with the light and we start in the underground area. 10:15 p.m. Important discovery. Orendorff and Watkins, working underground at 9:45 with light, found a monstrous barrel-shaped fossil of wholly unknown nature, probably vegetable unless overgrown specimen of unknown marine redata. Tissue evidently preserved by mineral slots, tough as leather. An astonishing flexibility, retained in places. Marks have broken off in parts at ends around sides, 6 feet end to 3.5 each central diameter, tapering to 1 foot of each end, like a barrel with 5 bulging ridges which place of the straps. Lateral breakages of this finished stalks are at the equator in middle of those ridges. In furrows between ridges are curious growths, combs or wings that fold up and spread out like fans, all greatly damaged but one, which gives almost 7-foot wing spread. Arrangement reminds me of certain monsters of primal myth, especially fabled elder things in the Necronomicon. These wings seem to be membranous, stretched on framework and glandular tubing. Apparent minute orifices and fume tubing with wing tips. Ends of body shriveled, giving no clue to interior or what has been broken off there. Must dissect when we get back to camp. Can't decide whether vegetable or animal. Many features, obviously of almost incredible primitiveness. Have set all hands cutting stalactites, looking for further specimens. Additional sacred bones found, but these must wait. Having trouble with dogs. They can't endure the new specimen. We'll probably tear it to pieces if we didn't keep it at a distance from them. 11:30 p.m. Attention, Dyer, Peabody, Douglas. Matter of highest, I must say, transcendent importance. Arkham must relay to the Kingsport head station at once. Strange barrel growth in the arcane thing that left prints on rocks. Mills, Bordreau and Fowler discovered a cluster of 13 more at Underground Point, 40 feet from the aperture, mixed with curiously rounded and confined soapstone fragments, smaller than ones when previously found, star-shaped but no marks of breakage except at some of the points. The organic specimens, 8 apparently perfect, with their appendages, have brought all to surface, leading off dogs in distance. They cannot stand the things. Give close attention to description and report back for accuracy. Papers must get this right. Objects are 8 feet long all over. 6'5" ridged barrel torsos, 3.5 central diameter. 1 foot end diameters, dark grey, flexible and infinitely tough. 7-foot membranous wings of some colour, found folded, spread out and furrows between ridges. Wing framework tubular and granular, of lighter greys with orifices at wingtips. Spread wings have serrated edge around equator. One at central apex of each of the 5 vertical, starve-like ridges. 5 systems of light grey flexible arms of tentacles found tightly folded on torso but expandable and maximum length of over 3 feet, like arms of privative cranoid. Single stalks 3 inches diameter, branch about 6 inches into 5 sub-stalks, each of which branches after 8 inches into 5 small, tapering tentacles or tendrils, giving each stalk a total of 25 tentacles. At top of torso, blunt, bulbous neck of lighter grey with grill-like suggestions hold yellowish 5-pointed starfish-shape apparent head covered with 3-inch wiry cellula of various prismatic colours. Head thick and puffy, about 2 feet point to point. There are 3-inch flexible yellowish tubes projecting from each point, slit in the exact centre of the top, probably breathing structure. At the end of the tube is a spherical expansion where yellowish membrane rolls back on the handling to reveal glassy red globe of evidently an eye. 5 slightly longer reddish tubes start from the inner angles of starfish-shaped head and the head of the sac with the swelling of the same colour, which upon presumed to open to bell-shaped orifices 2 inches maximum diameter, and lined with sharp white tooth-like projections, probable mouths. All these tubes, cilia and points of starfish head found folded tightly down. Tubes at point cling to the bulbous necks and torso, flexibility surprising despite vast toughness. At bottom of torso, rough and dismally functioning counterparts of head arrangements existed. Bulbous light grey pseudo-neck with grill suggestions hold greenish 5-pointed starfish arrangement. Tough muscular arms, 4 feet long and tapering from 7 inches in diameter at the base of about 2.5. To point at attached small end of greenish 5-mented membranous triangle, 5 inches long and 6 wide at the further end. This is the paddle, fin or pseudo-foot which has made the prints in the rocks from 1,000 million years to 50 or 60 million years old. From inner angles of the starfish arrangement project 2-foot reddish tubes tapering from 3-inch diameter at base of one tip, orifices at tips. All these parts infinitely tough and leathery, but extremely flexible. 4-foot arms with paddles undoubtedly used for locomotion of some sort, marine or otherwise. When moved, display suggests of exaggerated muscularity. As found, all these projections tightly folded of pseudo-neck and end of torso corresponding to projections at other end. Cannot yet assign positively to animal or vegetable kingdom, but odds now favour animal. Probably represents incredibly advanced evolution of Redata without loss of certain primitive features. Echinoderm resembles unmistakably despite local contradictory evidences. Wing structure puzzles in few portable marine habitat, but may be used in water navigation. Symmetry is curiously vegetable-like, suggesting vegetables essentially up and down structure rather than animals' fore and after structure. Fabulously early date of evolution preceding even simplest archaean protozoa hitherto known, baffles all conjecture to its origin. Complete specimens have such uncanny resemblance to certain creatures of primal myth that suggestion of ancient existence outside of the Antarctic becomes inevitable. Dyer and Peabody have read the Necronomicon and seen Clark Ashton Smith's nightmare paintings based on text, and will understand when I speak of elder things supposed to have created all Earth life as a jest or mistake. Students have always thought of conception formed from morbid imagination treatment of very ancient and tropical data. Also, like prehistoric folklore things, Wilmarth has spoken of Cthulhu cult appendages, etc. Vast field of study, open deposits probably at late Cretaceous or early Eocene period, judging from the associated specimens, massive stalagmites and deposited above them, hard work thawing out, but toughness prevented damage. State of preservation miraculous, evidently owing to limestone action. No more found so far, but will return search later. Job now to get 14 huge specimens to camp without dogs, which bark furiously and can't be trusted near them. With 9 men, 3 left to guard the dogs, we ought to manage the 3 sledges fairly well, though wind is bad. Must establish plane communications with McMurdo Sound, and begin with shipping material. I've got to dissect one of these things before we take any rest. Wish I had a real laboratory here. Dyer better kick himself for not having tried to stop my westward trip. First the world's greatest mountains and then this. If this at last isn't the high spot of the expedition, I don't know what is. We're made scientifically. Congrats, Peabody, on the drill that opened up the cave. I will Arkham, please repeat the description.
The sensation of Peabody and myself at receipt of this report were almost beyond description, nor were our companions much behind us in enthusiasm. McTighe, who had hastily translated the few high spots which they came in drone and receiver set, wrote out the entire message from his shorthand version as soon as Lake's operator signed off. All appreciated the epoch-marking significance of the discovery, and I sent Lake congratulations as soon as the Arkham operator had reported back the descriptive parts as requested. And my example was followed by Sherman, from his station at McMurdo Sound supply cache, as well as by Captain Douglas of the Arkham. Later, as head of the expedition, I added some remarks to relay through the Arkham to the world outside. Of course, rest was an absurd thought amidst the excitement, and my only wish was to go to Lake's camp as quickly as I could. It disappointed me when he sent word of the rising mountain gale made early aerial travel impossible. But within an hour and a half of interest rose again to banish the disappointment. Lake was sending more messages and told of the completely successful transportation of the 14 great specimens to the camp. He had been a hard pull of the things that were surprisingly heavy, but 9 men had accomplished it very neatly. Now some of the party were hurriedly building a snow corral at the safe distance from the camp, to which the dogs could have been brought for convenience in feeding. The specimens were laid out on the hard snow near the camp, save for one which Lake was making crude attempts at dissection. The dissection seemed to be a greater task than had been expected, for despite the heat of the gasoline stove in the newly raised laboratory tent, and descriptively flexible tissues of chosen specimen, the powerful one in fact, lost nothing of their more leathery toughness. Lake was puzzled as to how he might make a request incisions with the violence destructive enough to upset the structural niceties that he was looking for. He had, and it's true, 7 more perfect specimens, but those were too few to use as recklessly unless the cave might later yield an unlimited supply. Accordingly, he removed the specimen and dragged in one which, though having remnants of the starfished arrangement at both ends, was badly crushed and partly disrupted along one of the great torso furrows. Results quickly reported over the wireless and were baffling and provocative indeed. Nothing like delicacy or accuracy was possible with the instruments hardly able to cut the anomalous tissue. But the little what we achieved left us with what awed and bewildered. Existing biology would have been wholly revised, for this thing was no product of any cell growth science knows about. There had been scarcely any minimal replacement, and despite the age of perhaps 40 million years, the internal organs were wholly intact. The leathery, undeteriorative, and almost indestructible quality was an inherent attribute of the thing's form of organisation, and pertained to some Paleogen cycle of invertebrate evolution utterly beyond our powers of speculation. At first, all that Lake found was dry, but it was heated to produce the thawing effect. Organic moisture and pungent and offensive odour was encountered towards the thing's uninjured side. It was not blood, but thick, dark green fluid, apparently answering the same purpose. By the time Lake reached the stage, all 37 dogs had been brought to the still, uncompleted corral near the camp, and even at the distance set up the savage barking and shove of their restless and arcade, destructive smell. Far from helping to the strange entity, this provisional dissection merely deepened its mystery. All guesses about his external members had been correct, and on the evidence that these things could hardly hesitate to call the thing an animal. But internal inspection brought up so many vegetable evidences that Lake was left hopelessly at sea. It had digestion and circulation, and eliminated waste matter through the reddish tubes of its starfish-shaped base. Curiously, one would say that its repository apparatus handled oxygen rather than carbon dioxide, and there were odd evidences of air storage chambers and methods of shifting respiration from external orifices. To the last two were fully developed breathing systems, gills and pores. Clearly it was an amphibian, and probably adapted to its long, airless hibernation periods as well. Vocal organs seemed to present its connection with the main respiratory system, and presented anomalies beyond immediate solution. Articulture speech, in the sense of syllable utterance, seemed barely conceivable, but musical pipe and notes covered a wide range that were highly probable. The muscular system was almost preternaturally developed. The nervous system was so complex that the highly developed as to leave Lake aghast. Though excessively primitive and archaic in some respects, the thing had a set of ganglion centres and connectives arguing the very extremes of specialised development. Its 5-lobed brain was surprisingly advanced, and there were signs of sensory equipment, served in part through the wily cilia of the head, involving factors alien and to any other terrestrial organism. Probably it had more than 5 senses, so that its habits could be not pre-predicted from any existing analogy. It must, Lake thought, have been a creature of keen sensitiveness and delicately differentiated functions in its primal world, much like the ants and bees of today. It reproduced like the vegetable cryptograms, especially the pteridophytes, having spore cases at the tips of the wings and evidently developed from thallus or prothallus. But to give name to these stage was mere folly. It looked like the radiate, but was clearly something more. It was partly vegetable, but had 3/4 of the essentials of animal structure. It was marine in origin, its symmetrical contour and the certain of attributes clearly indicated. Yet one could not be exact as the limit of its later adaptations. The wings, after all, held a persistent suggestion of the aerial. How it could have undergone its tremendously complex evolution on a newborn Earth in the time to leave prints in Archean rocks was so far beyond any conception as to make Lake whimsically recall the primal myths about the great old ones who filtered down from the stars and concocted life as a joke or a mistake, and wild tales of the cosmic hill things from the outside told by folklorist colleagues in Miskatonic English department. Naturally, he considered the possibility of the Precambrian prints having been made by the less evolved ancestor of the present specimens, but quickly rejected this to be too facile theory upon considering the advanced structural qualities of the older fossils. If anything, the later contours showed decadence rather than higher evolution. The size of the pseudophyte had decreased, and the whole morphology seemed coarse-eyed and simplified. Moreover, the nerves and organs were just examined held singular suggestions of retrogression from the forms still more complex. Atrophied and vestigial parts were surprisingly prevalent. Altogether, little could be said to have been solved, and Lake fell back on mythology for the provisional name, jocosely dubbing his finds the Elder Ones. About 2:30 a.m., having decided to postpone further work and get a little rest, he covered the dissected organism with a tarpaulin and emerged from the laboratory tent and studied the intact specimens with renewed interest. The ceaseless Antarctic sun had begun to limber up the tissues a too trifle, so that the end points of the tubes in the 2 or 3 showed signs of unfolding, but Lake did not believe there was any danger of intermittent decomposition in the almost sub-zero air. He did, however, move all the undissected specimens closer together to throw the spare tent over them, in order to keep them off the direct solar rays. That would also help keep their possible scent away from the dogs, whose hostile unrest was really becoming a problem even at their substantial distance and behind a higher and now higher wall of snow that increased the quota of men hastening to the rise above their quarters. He had to weigh down the corners of the tent cloth, each with heavy blocks of snow, to hold it in place amidst the rising gale, for the Titan mountains seemed about to deliver some gravely severe blasts. Early apprehensions about sudden Arctic winds were now revised under Artwood's supervision. Precautions were taken back to the tents. New dog corral and crude aeroplane shelters with snow on the mountainward side. These latter shelters, begun with hard snow blocks during odd moments, were no means as high as they should have been, and Lake finally detached all hands from other tasks to work with them. It was after 4 when Lake had prepared to sign off and advised all of us to share in the rest period his outfit would take when the shelter walls were a little higher. He held some friendly chat with Peabody over the ether and reported his praise for relentlessly marvellous drills that had helped him with his discovery. Artwood had sent greetings and praises. I gave Lake a warm word of congratulations, owing up that he was right about the western trip, and we all agreed to get in the plane for the party at the base. Just before retiring, I dispatched a final message for the Arkham with instructions about toning down the day's news for the outside world, since the full details seemed radical enough to rouse a wave of incredulity until further sustained.